Hello again. Um, so now that we've covered, a lot of the preparatory material, how to get mentally ready, how to get mentally into writing modes, now we're ready to get started. So once you have a basic understanding of what your paper is going to be, now you won't have it all mapped out yet. You're going to figure some of this out as you're writing the paper and as you're doing more research. But once you have a general point in mind, okay, there are two basic types of organizational tools that you can use uh, as needed. They're quite a bit different. One is far more visual, one is far more kind of linguistic or language oriented. But I think they're both, worth exploring at least briefly here, just to give you a sense of how to map things out for yourself mentally. Now, in my 119 class, I do a um, pretty thorough lecture on thesis statements. Um, the problem there, and I'm not going to do it in the 300 class because the thesis statement in a science paper, especially in the natural sciences, is going to work a lot differently than a thesis statement in a response type of essay where you're reading, let's say, a short story or a poem or whatever, philosophy essay, and you're responding to that because that's more or less, an opinion. It's subjective. Um, so the thesis statement in the types of articles you're going to read and write are going to be quite a bit different. So I'm not talking about thesis statements here in the same way. So if you've had 119 with me or 120, which I haven't taught yet, um, you'll have a different kind of understanding of the thesis. So we're gonna kind of ignore that here for the time being. Um, but once you have, and you're all experienced writers by now, if you're in 300, so you have a general sense of, okay, how do I generate an idea? How do I generate the basic premise from which my paper will come? So there's two basic types of organizational tools. There's a map, and then my handwriting is terrible, a numerical outline. So the map, as you can imagine, looks something, it can look however you want to draw it, okay? There's a million different types of these. There are actually templates for concept maps online. If you just type in concept map template into Google, you'll find these. But here you'd have your main subject. What am I looking at? What am I examining? What am I writing about? Okay. And then the idea of the support here are the basic premises, interpretations, the legs of support, columns, pillars, whatever you want to call them, foundations, that are going to support the basic subject that you're analyzing. If you're in the natural sciences, these are probably going to be a bit more actuarial or numerically based. If you're doing something in the social sciences, which does involve gathering statistics and data, but it has a more subjective facet by way of interpretation. You're taking statistics and the social sciences, it's far more likely that you're going to be interpreting those than presenting them as you would in the natural sciences. So these support columns here are meant to function differently depending on if you're doing social sciences or you're doing the natural sciences. Okay, natural sciences are going to present data and basically just say whether or not the data support the subject. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this today, but it's basically, if you're doing a directed or null hypothesis, the data do not support, right? Analyzing the effects of homeopathic healing on post-traumatic stress syndrome does not support the null hypothesis, let's say, that homeopathic medicine can be a good tool for helping people with PTSD. If you run those tests, let's say, and it doesn't support it, what you've got, therefore, is a null hypothesis about the subject. comparative analysis of homeopathic healing on PTSD. Now, if you're in the social sciences, that might look a little bit more, a little fuzzier, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that you can take those same statistics and maybe even show a different result. So it's really, the subject and support is really just different depending on what kind of science you're writing. Now, part of this, and we'll talk about this here in a lecture I'm probably going to do after this one, which will outline the kind of canonical structure of scientific papers, and that's to cover natural and social sciences. You'll have to get a methods section in there. Okay, what methods did you do? What methods did you use? Was it interviews? Was it lab work? What kind of lab work? What were the tests that were run, etc. You can sometimes present, depending on the paper you're writing, alternative methods in your methodology section. Also important, especially in natural sciences, is to list your controls, right? Those things, those factors that you placed into the experiments, the data gathering, that sought to control the kind of unpredictable outcomes, right? So controls are always very important. You could think of a control, for example, like let's say we're doing, let's say we're testing a medicine, right? And so we've got medicine X, okay? And then we've got a placebo, right? So we gave X to 50 people, and we gave who, let's say, were suffering from hypertension, okay, which was causing high blood pressure. We gave another 50 people of the same basic demographic slice, okay? People in the ages of, here's methods, people in the ages of 35 to 55, roughly, let's say, they all lived in Nassau, okay? And we split evenly between men and women. We gave that same placebo to the same demographically, or the demographically similar group of people, same demographics, and then that's our methods, which would then yield the results. Maybe it's a null hypothesis and there's no distinction between, okay, people who are given this medicine and people given a placebo. That would be that, okay, this medicine doesn't work for lowering blood pressure and hypertension. Okay, well, maybe it does. Okay, maybe 60% of these people report, better cardiovascular health. Excellent. Maybe in this, there was no real change. Okay, so that would seem to suggest that this medicine does, in fact, have the effects that we're looking for. That is where this comes in. Okay, that yields the results. Okay, now to go back to this point, controls in this sense, right, could simply be, in this case, making sure that the demographics are representatively equal. Okay, so if we're giving, let's say, medicine X to 50 people who are, 45 years and older, and only men, versus we give a placebo to 50, let's say, 30-year-old women, right? That control is terrible, right? We haven't. Our methods are not going to work. Like we're not even approaching science. Okay, we're not even approaching a workable experiment here. Okay, so that's what I mean by controls. That's what I mean by methods. Okay, these are just things that, as you're writing papers, especially in the sciences, you're going to have to deal with. So we get results. Let's say alpha, beta, gamma. Right? We do this experiment. The results are people 50 years older report a much higher, people given medicine X, 50 years or older, report a much higher reaction to the medicine. People in their 40s was pretty much even, let's say, across the medicine and the placebo. That would once again seem to suggest older people can benefit from this, whereas relatively younger people in their 40s, which is, I'm in my 40s, and I'm very feel very young. Um, but then, another result could be, okay, well, maybe, let's break it down demographically. Maybe men reported less advantage from the medicine than did women. So once again, we would combine our results and say, okay, in our conclusions here, it would seem to suggest that women ages 50 or over seem to benefit more from taking the medicine rather than men 50 years or older. So you see, you're breaking down those conclusions and you're just kind of analyzing, here's what we found. Okay, now that's a basic kind of map. This is something that if you put it out there as a skeleton, as you're writing the paper, you'll kind of remember to drop these categories into your paper. You're not going to forget about them, okay? So it's not like you have to have it all mapped out before you write. That would be impossible because you're mapping it out, then you're doing the experiment, right? Then you're discussing results and conclusions. So you see that the map is simply helping you to mentally categorize and organize stuff so you don't forget certain sections or you don't forget certain areas. The other one, I'm sure you've seen a million of these. It's the simple numerical or alphabetic outline. This is where you would just kind of list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, with little subheadings like this, 1.1, 1.2. It could be, it could go like this, 1A, B, C, 2, A, B, C, 3, A, subsection, Roman numerals. It's up to you. I mean, these kind of outlines are also beneficial. You're probably a lot more familiar with these. Probably a lot more familiar with these kinds than the maps, but I think either one works. It kind of depends on whether or not you're a more visually oriented person. Some people are, some people aren't. So these are two basic alternatives, I think, to outlining things that that work pretty well. I just want to kind of show you, just as a brief aside, keeping notes, keeping journals, and keeping them very, very well, not just organized, but labeled, okay? So for example, in preparing this course, I have a hardbacked, I prefer these kinds of notebooks because they're less likely to be damaged. I have a very like stiff cardboard covers with pages inside that you can't tear out, okay, so they're not perforated. So these pages aren't going to just accidentally work themselves loose, which happens sometimes, okay? And on every single class, every single book I write, every single project, article, etc., on the cover of that book, there's a label. This one, I believe, says English 300 Lectures and Notes. So on my notebook I'm looking at right here, it says English 300 Lectures and Notes. Now, as I'm writing, okay, lectures, as I'm writing articles, okay, this one actually might say, another one might just say poems, or it might say, poems in the title of the book I'm working on. Inside that book, page to page to page, and this is just what works for me. Okay, this is my organizational strategy. If you have a different one, whatever works for you, use it. What I do on the top right-hand corner, I write the name of the thing I'm doing. Okay, so it might be English 300 organization notes. Okay, and I write out kind of bullet points for things. I don't write them all out longhand. It takes too long. But I'll write out bullet points of talking points that I want to do. Then when I go and type the lectures, I type those all out in a file and then I save it, because then if I ever need to, like let's say, for example, we had a hurricane and then a pandemic and I was forced to leave Nassau, and I left all of my lecture notes behind in my office down in Nassau. Well, since they're all digital, right, I can then just print them off my computer anew. But here for my notebooks, this is how I do it. So I make bullet points, and sometimes if there's like a consequential point, so such and such and such and such, and here's like a consequence, I just do these little arrows, right? And it's kind of like a nice visual cue to me, like, oh, okay, well, this point follows from this, or these 3 points follow from this point here that I'm making. Sometimes I'll put little boxes over here. Sometimes I'll use just Greek lettering to let me know that, oh, here's alpha. And sometimes over here, I'll list alpha if I run out of room. Okay. Over here, there's further notes as needed. And I am constantly marking out my citations. So here, if I'm quoting someone, if I type out, if I'm writing out, here's the author, page number and a good quote, I might mark that with alpha. Over here, I would type out, or I write out, that author's name and then the book, page number, so that when I'm going back and writing the lecture or writing the article, every single citation is listed. So therefore, when I write the final version, I know that my citation list is complete. So therefore, if I'm writing this paper and I mention author A, I quote author A, and then in my reference list, I forget, I list authors B, C, D, E, but I forget author A, that's actually plagiarism. That's a form of plagiarism. It's kind of plagiarism by omission. And like I've said many a time, in my profession, you can lose your job for even accidental plagiarism. It's a very serious offense. So always being responsible for the citations that you put in the papers, super duper important. And this all just comes once again from being as organized as you possibly can. So if you go through my notebooks, you flip to the next page, it might have the same listing up here. It might say English 300 organization lecture CONT continued, right? You flip to the next page and it might be English 300 essay structure lecture, okay? And flip to the next page and that might be the same heading. So that way when I'm flipping through these booklets, right, I can very quickly go through and say like, okay, don't need it. Here's the lecture I'm looking for. Okay, rather than having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes, and if they're not organized, you have no idea where they are, right? So this allows me to free up some memory in my own head for important things, like remembering to eat or to drink water, important stuff. So these are just a couple real quick ways of organizing and structuring the essay even before you start writing it. And in the next essay, the next lecture, what I'm going to talk about is what's called the canonical kind of essay structure for science writing. So this is the next lecture is going to be super important. So I really want everybody to pay attention to that because that will be the kind of foundational core of the types of articles most of you will write per your majors, especially in the sciences and social sciences. Okay. So I hope this helps, and thanks.